Hey everyone, I'm Lauren Williams, Senior Editor at Defense One, and I'm excited to continue today's discussion with Major General Paul Stanton, the Commanding General of the Cyber Center of Excellence for the United States Army. General Stanton, thank you so much for being here today.
Lauren, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I want to kick us off and talk about, what the CCOE is, and particularly because it's related, how you're taking lessons learned in ongoing conflicts, particularly Ukraine and Gaza, and incorporating that into your training.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Cyber Center of Excellence is responsible for training all of our signal, electronic warfare, and cyber soldiers. So we're responsible for what the Army refers to as professional military education. So that is initial entry soldiers and periodic revisiting of soldiers for their professional development throughout their careers. And we are very active in ensuring that we maintain relevancy and currency with what we teach inside of the classroom. We manage our curriculum based off of what we refer to as a program of instruction. Within that, we write what I would consider a relatively broad left and right bounds of what we're going to teach. But how we teach it is very rapidly adjusted according with changes in the operating environment and in accordance with changes in technology. So as an example, we may have a lecture or a class on routing technologies. But the current routing technologies of today and how we're leveraging modernized technology and what we're watching on the battlefield and using space-based capabilities in order to support that is how we will teach it in the classroom. So we pride ourselves in maintaining consistency, however, adjusting according to how the operating environment changes with us.
And just kind of a follow-up question, is it just cyber, or is there EW and IW in there too, electronic warfare and information warfare? Are those in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually there are three schools that are within the Cyber Center of Excellence. There is the cyber school, which includes both cyber and electromagnetic warfare. There's the signal school. So how do we move and transport data to the right place at the right time? And then there's our non-commissioned officer academy, where we have our non-commissioned officers return back to become current and ensure that they are moving along with their professional timelines and remain current. But yes, absolutely. So cyber, electronic warfare, and basic data flows, how to get data from one spot to the next, are the things that we are responsible for. And you can imagine watching what's happening in the Ukraine right now as an example, very rapid evolution and change in how both the Ukrainians and the Russians are leveraging the electromagnetic spectrum against each other. And so we sit back and we watch all of that happen and determine, what do we need to change inside of the classroom? How do we have to teach this differently to make sure that our graduates from our courses are ready to go into their operational units of assignment?
And I'm glad you mentioned this, because I'm working on a story now, actually, based on a hearing where they're talking about how the Russians are using jamming capabilities in Ukraine, and how that is affecting like the U.S. supplied smart munitions. And so are those the kind of things that are explored? And is it just kind of, on a computer, in like with a whiteboard, or are there kind of like simulations that soldiers go through?
A combination of factors. Absolutely, there are the lectures that ensure that we have the right scientific underpinnings and the fundamentals. Because to be candid, there's a lot of science, there are a lot of physics and understanding the electromagnetic spectrum, and we need to make sure that all of our graduates, all of our students understand those basics. But then how they're being employed changes dynamically. And so a combination of simulations and actually taking capabilities and what we call KIT out into the woods and turning it on, so that our soldiers have that real world experience of using capabilities. Yes, both the Ukrainians and the Russians are using jamming capabilities against each other's weapon systems. And so we have to recognize, well, if Russia might attempt to jam one of our precision guided munitions, how must we then ensure that that is developed so that it can defeat that capability if and when we ever needed to use it? So those are very dynamic lessons. What we're discovering is that rapid change is part of the operating environment. So as we build capabilities, as we design capabilities that are intended to leverage the electromagnetic spectrum, we have to build that agility into the design. As an example, if I'm attempting to communicate with some ground-based system with some unmanned aerial vehicle, there are communications that happen between those two. If our enemies determine how the ground station and the unmanned system are communicating with each other, they can then jam that signal. Well, our signal then has to be resilient to adjust dynamically, so that our enemies won't actually achieve the effect that they intended. And so we carry that back into our research and development, and rapidly into the actual delivery of our capabilities, based off of the things that we're watching happen in the Ukraine now.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned data earlier, so I don't want to lose that train of thought. Can you talk a bit about how that is being incorporated in CCOE's curriculum and mission overall?
Yes. Our secretary, the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army have said that we are going to be data centric. In order to be data centric, we have to be data literate. Now, we at Echelon have to understand how we're going to employ data. The way we think about it in the Cyber Center of Excellence is dividing into three categories. We have data experts, we have data practitioners, and then we have data citizens and soldiers. So the experts, we believe that we're responsible for that here at the Cyber Center of Excellence. These are folks that are data engineers, they're data operators. They understand how to do the extract, transform, and load and storage and compute design architectures, and how to move data from one spot to the next on the battlefield. They are experts in the field. Data practitioners are the folks that, frankly, those are our leaders. They have to understand how they're going to incorporate and depend on data when they execute their operations. If they don't put the right systems in the right place on the battlefield, then they won't move the right data at the right time to the right place to support their decisions. They have to understand that when they direct a decision to be made, that there are data consequences that have to be accounted for. If I want to answer this particular question, and it has a dependency on data, well, then I better ensure that I've sensed and collected that right data, moved it to the right spot upon which to run an analytic, and then reported it through some visualization, all within relevant timelines to support decision-making. That's practitioners. So our Army's leaders need to understand how data is going to be employed on the battlefield. And then every single soldier has to be a data citizen. You have to understand the ramifications of carrying your cell phone with you when you move around, even at your home station or your workplace. You have to have a fundamental understanding of how data works. So what we're doing at the Cyber Center of Excellence, we're developing the experts. We actually have recently developed a particular military occupational specialty focused on data. And we're teaching what I would consider to be a graduate level course on data engineering and data operations. We're informing the Mission Command Center of Excellence and the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth about what every leader and every soldier needs to know. And they're responsible for incorporating that into the professional military education for every soldier. So they have the responsibility for organizing professional military education as it applies to the entire Army. We're very much part of the conversation to ensure that they design that appropriately. we narrowly at the Cyber Center of Excellence are designing, building, and developing those data experts.
Awesome. And I'm curious about how other technologies, because data, I think data and I think AI. So how are the technologies also kind of playing into this? I mean, technology, as you know better than most, is rapidly evolving, and so there's always something new. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd be hard pressed on the future battlefield to find a system that isn't either a data producer, a data consumer, or both. So our sensors are generating a lot of data. Our battlefield systems have data dependencies. And so we have to figure out how to, in very colloquial terms, get the right data to the right place at the right time. And so we have to think about the data transport component of, do I have the capacity to move the data? Once I move it, do I have enough storage and compute capacity in order to bring the data together, aggregate it in a meaningful way, and then run some analytic on top of it? Can I do all of that at decision support, mission relevant speed? I have to be able to make better and faster decisions than our adversaries and our enemies. If I can't bring together the right data and drive the right decision for our leaders faster than the enemy, then I'm failing. And so we have to be able to design our systems to be able to move the data effectively. Artificial intelligence is not the be-all, end-all, but it's absolutely relevant to this discussion and conversation. There are a number of different decision support criteria that would be rapidly enabled by artificial intelligence. If I can make sense of very large volumes of data very rapidly and condense that down into something that is discernible to support decision-making, then we should absolutely employ it. And in fact, we here at the Cyber Center of Excellence have recently designed a large language model. So if you think, if you set your mind around something like ChatGPT, we're building a large language model such that I could ask interesting questions and get back very intuitive responses very rapidly. A distinguishing characteristic, however, is I don't want the rest of the internet and the data available to the rest of the internet diluting or changing the responses and answers that are relevant for military decision making. And so we need to be able to trace the responses from an AI generated algorithm back to authoritative data sources so that we can be sure about the decisions that we make. And so we have very smart folks that work in and amongst the Cyber Center of Excellence that are actually driving that technology on our behalf.
That's really interesting. And I'm hoping that you can say a little bit more about this large language model and how it's being employed and the type of data that it's sifting through, especially since it's not swallowing the whole internet and then spitting out information, even though publicly available data is definitely useful in military applications. But could you just kind of walk me through a little bit more what you guys are doing there?
Sure. I'll give you two examples. The first is we're leveraging the large language model to support answering doctrinally based questions. So our Army produces a number of different doctrinal manuals. And if I am a young lieutenant, a young officer responsible for putting together a plan, I want to make sure that I have referenced the right doctrine in order to inform that plan. But the response that I get back from the AI algorithm needs to be tied back to authoritative doctrinal sources. I don't want randomness introduced into the doctrinal explanation. And so what the LLM that we've developed does is it gives you back an answer, but then in addition to the answer, lists out the doctrinal references that were used in order to make that informed response. Now, so that's one example. So being able to trace back to authoritative source is a design criteria for the LLM that we're building. A second example is that we're using artificial intelligence to help us create dynamic content for how we're teaching our courses here in the schoolhouse. And so as an example, you could ask the large language model, build me a Python script for parsing net flow data. I'm making that up, but that's a relevant question that you might ask of the large language model. I don't want bad code influencing the response to the code that the large language model generates. And if you search out on the broader internet, there are plenty of examples of horribly written code that is either inefficient or unsecure, contrasted with code bases that have been validated and vetted that are that we know are one, correctly written, two, secure, and three, efficient. We want the response for our classroom-based teaching to be informed by the latter and not the former.
Also, I'm curious, I want to know about your priorities, but before we get there, I know the Army did a 120-day study looking into cyber EW, IW. What part of that did or do you own, and can you share any of those insights?
Yeah. So I'm the 120-day study is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, it was my name that signed the document that was submitted to our Army's leadership. What I'll tell you is that there is a sense of urgency for we as the Army to field what we refer to as our electromagnetic warfare manpack capability. So we have written requirements for a backpack-enabled capability that performs electronic attack, electronic support, and electronic protect missions. So two soldiers carrying the backpack can look out into the electromagnetic spectrum, find signals of interest, and support informing operationally relevant information back to decision makers. Where is the enemy? We can use that system to geolocate interesting targets. We can use that system to perform jamming on targets of interest of the adversary. As an example, we can jam their voice communications from a battlefield perspective. But very importantly, we could also turn that system back onto ourselves and determine what we look like in the electromagnetic spectrum, because we know that our adversaries have us under constant observation. In our new doctrine, FM30 operations, we have written in, we know that we are going to fight under constant observation. Part of that observation is through the electromagnetic spectrum. So what do we look like inside of a command post? What signature are we creating? And so we turn the system back on ourselves, and we can help educate and train our leaders on emissions control. I know that you are speaking with the commanding generals of our training centers, and they are very adept at using the electromagnetic spectrum from an opposing force perspective to find our formations and then target them. Well, the first time that our commanders have ever been exposed to that is when they get to the training center. That's way too late. That's way too late. We have to let commanders know what they look like in their own backyard when they're doing home station training, so that it changes their understanding and employment of capabilities that emanate, that radiate energy. And then lastly, we also can turn that manpack system back onto ourselves in an opposing force context to force our formations to fight through a contested electromagnetic spectrum. So are we being jammed? Until you've been jammed, you don't know that you're being jammed. And so how do our maneuver formations react to the fact that they're fighting in a contested environment? So this one system of record, the manpack capability for EW, helps us solve a number of problems. It puts meaningful, functioning, highly important capabilities into the hands of our soldiers. It gives us the ability to achieve effects against the enemy. It gives us the ability to change our own culture and understanding of what it means to fight in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then it gives us the ability to train that at home station. That is, from a Cyber Center of Excellence perspective, our number one priority in the next 6 months is to start fielding that capability.
Also, and can you elaborate a little, because you said it being introduced at the training center is a little bit too late. Is there a plan for like a tour of sorts to bring that manpack, across the floor?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Pending decisions on passing our budget, the funding will be available to deliver the manpack to our EW formations in every brigade combat team, with fielding starting in this fiscal year. So we'll start issuing out the manpack capability. In parallel, we at the Cyber Center of Excellence are working on the EW training strategy. A key component to that training strategy is the ability to execute electronic warfare training at home station. There are a handful of places right now where we own enough of the electromagnetic spectrum where we can train it. The fact that the National Training Center is in Fort Irwin, California, in the middle of the desert, is a great bonus for us to be able to own the electromagnetic spectrum. There are no hospitals that we're unintentionally going to jam. There are no aircraft that fly overhead. There are no schools that might suffer from turning on jammers. Each home station has to develop a package of what does it mean to turn on the capabilities in our own localized training area. So we're developing the criteria that each home station has to work through, but we're doing that in parallel with the timelines for fielding. The intent is that as the manpack system is delivered to a formation, that the homework has been done such that the soldiers can go into their own localized training area at Fort Campbell, at Fort Liberty, at Fort Drum, at all of our installations, and turn the capability on. And then that way, by the time they get to our training centers, they already have repetitions and sets and training to make them that much more proficient.
Awesome. And so that's something that would be a new start for fiscal 24 once appropriations are made. Are there any other projects that you're excited about once the faucet gets turned on and you're no longer under a continuing resolution?
So the manpack is absolutely tied to the budget being passed so that we can start fielding this year. There are other incredibly promising technologies. In fact, we have a large portion of our team at Project Convergence out at the National Training Center in Fort Irwin today, looking at capabilities for decoy systems, for obfuscation, for command and control. So if you think about all of these future systems that will be sensing the electromagnetic spectrum, we need to be able to tie all that together in a meaningful way to support decision making. And so command and control within the EMS is critically important. So we have a capability that we're experimenting with at Project Convergence that's looking at that. Separately, we need decoy systems. Such that if the enemy is looking at us through the electromagnetic spectrum, they can't pinpoint us. They might be able to see us, but they can't understand us. In addition, we need to be able to raise the noise floor of the signal to noise ratio such that, again, they might be able to see that we are in a generalized location, but the enemy won't be able to pinpoint target our capabilities. So obfuscation, command and control capabilities, the ability to see ourselves in the EMS, all very promising capabilities that we're working on and actually experimenting with today out at the National Training Center.
Awesome. And for 25, we're gonna speak positive, and 25 will be here before you know it. Can you talk about what your plans are for fiscal 25?
Yes. So we will continue to drive the experimentation for our terrestrial layer system. It's the Manpack is a commercial off-the-shelf capability that has demonstrated its operational effectiveness and is ready to be fielded. The terrestrial layer system that is vehicular based needs to continue to do some advanced experimentation. So that's a huge focus for us in FY25. Now, additionally, in FY25, we believe that we're seeing the very rapid maturation of these obfuscation and decoy capabilities. So we'll look at rapidly advancing that technology. Separately, from a data transport line of thinking, we're very much working on modernizing and optimizing solutions that move data from one spot to the next. So how do we take the currently fielded equipment that we have within our signal regiment and optimize it for a new way of fighting where we're going to continuously be on the move, and we have to continue to think about disaggregating so that we don't make one big target for the enemy. And so we're very aggressively in FY24 and in FY25 designing the capabilities to support moving data for command and control.
General Stan, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being here and for your insights today.
My pleasure.
And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Stay tuned as next week we continue our State of Defense programming with the Navy on March 26th and the Air Force on March 28th. We hope to see you there. For Defense One, I'm Lauren Williams.